We're in England, and I found two Maltese tourist guides, and I'm going to look at them. And I'm sure the conclusion of the video will be, oh, what a mess they made of the island. But I've got to say that when I'm in Malta and I have this discussion with people in Malta, I say that England has suffered from the same consequences of the same problems. And the England of my childhood in Warwickshire is pretty much disappeared. So this book here is my guidebook. I was given in Malta in 1982 by my father. So I would have gone to Mdina with my father and brothers and mother, and we probably would have been visiting my uncle who lived in Rabat. And he probably bought this from a man in the car park, because in those days, and nowadays I think as well, a hawker would have a pile of guidebooks and flog them to the tourists. So this is a sort of British era, tail end of the British era, semi-Maltese, semi-English, semi-touristic guide, printed by Union Press in Malta, and it's got what you'd expect. It's got a beautiful picture of Mdina from the road with the pine trees, which very nearly were all cut down recently, and the pressure group stopped the government from chopping down many of the pine trees. This is only a few years ago. So you can see how up against it Malta is when you have a government that is willing to cut down a indigenous tree such as the Aleppo pine. So I'll go through the pictures. We have a plan. We have a picture of a knocker. The British find the door knockers quite interesting. You have a Baroque gateway. Another view of the fortress. We have the main gate with the scutcheons and trophies, beautiful gate. The gateway has been embellished and the government has put in gravel and flashy lighting and imported Chinese granite and lots of cheesy cast iron ornate Victorian style lights and benches, which are very useful for the tourists and look very nice but are totally out of keeping. And in this era, in the moat, the ditch, there were olive trees and orange trees, which I think were better. The problem with the lighting and the gravel is it needs tending to every day, so it's going to cost a fortune to maintain. We go into the citadel and it's pretty much the same now. It's a protected UNESCO place. The protection perhaps has euthanized the character of the place. There are not as many local people living there or working there anymore. There are not so many nuns or monks hanging around. But the place is beautiful still, despite what I say about the street furniture. But I think that it has lost the vitality that you can still find in places such as Burgo in Malta. This is a beautiful image of Mdina. The Zara Palace courtyard is there, with the lovely little old cars, which you would be able to take in if you were using the hotel. And of course outside Mdina you have the Roman villa and the Karatsin people still there now, who are flogging a dead horse is the wrong expression, but they're flogging a dead horse. I'm not sure the tourists want to be driven around in a landau where the horse is obviously distressed in the sun, lathering sweat, stinking, shitting on the floor. I'm not sure that's what tourists really want anymore. You have some tombs, and you have some textile manufacturing, which is gone. Weaving. So I would say that is an interesting little guidebook. The citadel of Mdina now has a very good Mdina glass outlet instead of some of the weaving outlets. And I think to many visitors, Mdina is cafes and coaches and queues. So we have another one here. This one is not my book. It's given to my father by an acquaintance. It was published in 1967, Malta and Gozo. And it has a very exhaustive list of attractions. Now, faldetta, gonella, the traditional hooded cloak of a Maltese lady with a whalebone to provide the shade. The tourists of 1967 were coming to Malta to see history and culture, and they were coming, of course, for the alcohol and the sunshine, of course. But they were going to the churches, they were going to the museums, they were going to the temples, they were going to the glass factory, the new glass factory, and they were looking at the leftovers of the Second World War and the colony. And for example, on this guide of sites, which is a very thin guide of sites, in Mdina you have palaces and churches only. In Rabat you have Roman villa, museum, catacombs, church only. You have got in Mdina cathedral, museum, Falzon house, seminary, walls only. In Valletta you have the cathedral, the museum, the armoury, the Auberge d'Aragon, Castile et Leon et de Provence. You have the Royal Library, the Manuel Theatre, Our Lady of Victory Church, Queen Square, Upper Baraka Gardens. That's it. So the pickings for tourists were thin. And we're not in the era of tattoo bars, Irish pubs, sports bars, Sky Sports bars, nail bars. We're not in the era of pavement cafes selling burgers, hamburgers, gruel to the tourists. The hotels are listed. There is a Phoenicia in Valletta only. The others are Bellevue, Bonaire, British Hotel, Cumberland, Osborne. So there's thin picking of hotels. In Slima and Pieta and Imsida there are more hotels. The British Hotel on the eastern walls of Valletta is a remarkable location. The restaurant upstairs has had the most fantastic view, but it's slightly, nowadays it would be regarded as a slightly cramped hotel. So it has information, this book has information about climate, the hotels, the shopping, tipping and bargaining, festas and folk events, theatre, cinema, public holidays. It has weights and measures, and the weights and measures are in Maltese. Ratal, Wisna, Kantar, Wisniet, Teres Nofs, Kartoch, Quata, Pinta, Teres Nofs, Kartoch. So it's a beautiful book. And the English were visiting this wonderful culture and were seeing the sights as prescribed in the book. And the polite conversation amongst the British between themselves in private was fairly respectful about the Maltese. We would moan about the power cuts, we'd moan about Mintoff, we'd moan about the paperwork, we'd moan about certain things, but it was, on the whole, the attitude was positive in my experience while in Malta with the English people. A chart of the Grand Masters. It talks about the Roman period. It talks about the people. The Maltese are very proud of their way of life. This is highly I think it must mean individualistic and indigenous, although to a casual eye it may not be immediately noticeable as such. The Maltese are islanders whose rocks have become an extremity of the Central European cultural bloc, or a splinter from it, some might think. Theirs has been a hard history of foreign and alien domination, a beleaguered history, and one of increasing double isolation by the sea and by their separateness from Europe. So, a commentary from the late 60s. Food and drink. Though many of the Maltese eat extremely well, and Elizabeth David first grew interested in food under the influence of a Maltese cook. Oh, I didn't know that. So Elizabeth David, who was very famous for bringing continental cooking to England, was fired up by a Maltese cook. That's interesting. You've got the wines of Malta. So we have Marsovin Special Reserve, Lacrimavitas, Farmers, Mistra, Milita, Marsovin Sauterne, Marsovin Vidal. I remember my parents drinking those by the gallon. Simmons Brewery, Malta, Chisk, Hopleaf, Kinney. The water on Malta will cause the newcomer to blench at the first taste. That's what it says in the guidebook. although perfectly safe for drinking, but he will get used to it quite quickly. That is not, the water here sometimes can be the colour of tea if there's been a power cut. So, wonderful book, lots of memories flooding back to me. My grandmother lived in Nimsida, which was then on the outskirts, a new outskirt, and she overlooked fields. That is now the centre of a suburb. It's what the Americans call donut effect, where you have increasing bands of suburbs. So I know that area pretty well, and we were able to walk down to Tash Beach from Nimsida quite quickly. Downhill, not so good coming uphill. So the book is really interesting, and it shows what the tourists are looking at. As I say, I mean, I'm 52. I'm bound to say, isn't it a shame all these things have been just destroyed or spoiled? But that's the feeling I have. And as I say, it's the same in England back home. Okay, thanks for looking.